popped in.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you back. Are we having a special time here at this conference? Awesome. Day by day, it just grows and ascends and develops and evolves. And we're so glad that you're here. This room will be getting filled in about an hour. Richard Dolan, just to let you know, is speaking in the other room, the small tent, and as soon as that finishes in an hour, we'll have a 5 or 10 minute break, and that tribe will come into this tribe, and we'll all be together, and he'll be joining us here on the panel. So again, welcome. My name is Mitchell Rabin. This is Sacha Stone, the co-moderator. We have a distinguished panel again. We're going to be speaking tonight about economics, as you can see to my right. And we're going to be speaking about healing and energy medicine to the left, and God knows what is going to happen in the middle. We're going to start with Gerald Salente, who is being Skyped in from New York. Gerald, are you there? I'm being called now. Gerald Salente is a leader in understanding trends. He's actually known as the martial artist.
And he's online.
Gerald, hi, welcome to Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, pleasure to have you. Gerald, you are a hero here before you have said one word. How do you like that for martial arts?
I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of difficulty. It's muffled. I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, is that so? Can you hear a little better now?
It's still pretty muffly.
It's pretty muffled. Okay. How about if I speak very slowly?
I'm sorry, I can't make you out.
Oh my. Robert, Jeroen, are you able to... Gerald does?
Yes. Try and tell him.
Gerald, do you have other applications on your computer open?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but it's coming in very muffled.
I see. Should I sing? Okay, I'll just do the best I can to be unmuffled. I'm basically going to simply ask you, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us. We're out in Boulder, Colorado. We have a wonderful group of people here learning about breakthrough energy technologies, and we very much wanted to have you weigh in on this. And to start with, we'd love to ask you, we know you have limited time, what would be your understanding of the business opportunities in the breakthrough energy technologies that are beginning to come forward in our society?
Well, you know, as you may know, I've been writing about infinite energy for many years, going back to my book Trends 2000 in 1995. And to me, it's the biggest game changer on the planet.
One moment, Gerald. A little technical difficulty here for a moment. We want to bring some infinite technologies into our audio world here.
Or just a Skype connection would be fine.
Okay. Are we set? Okay. Do you know sign language?
Okay, well, your voice sounds better than theirs.
Okay. Oh, we're
Okay.
back. So please pick up where you were on infinite technologies.
Yes, I've been writing about this for many years, and to me, infinite energy, a something beyond solar, wind, geothermal, or biofuel. And again, I'm not an expert in this field. I only look at trends in the broader sense and bring them back to the general application. So, I don't claim to be a scientist, or do I play one as the publisher of the Trends Journal. But as I look at the trends, the world is ready for it now more than anything, and an infinite energy of sorts, something almost free, that's renewable and clean. And again, I don't know the applications, whether it's hydrino power or coal fusion or whatever it might be, but something of that magnitude. And when I say it could be the biggest game changer, I mean that in the truest sense. Just look at America's foreign policy, or that of France or the UK or many of the Western nations. How it would change in the Middle East if there wasn't that national security issue. It's kind of like an updated version of the old spice wars, So rather than spice, the new spice, of course, for the last century has been oil. And so that would change. The whole geopolitical landscape would change. It would be the biggest economic game changer as well. If you can imagine people being off the grid. And being off the grid, then you're going to have a whole new type of civilization developing, where people could really live their lives.
Gerald, I'm so sorry, but we're getting this fixed momentarily. I think that might be it. No, I'm wrong. Can someone IM him an apology? He'll start working on his Trends Journal. If I didn't say that, I will now. Gerald Celente, as probably most of you know, is the publisher of the Trends Journal. And it's a world-renowned journal. And he is, I'm proud to say, he's another fellow New Yorker with that kind of sassy humor. Did you notice? He's just getting warmed up. What? No? Ooh.
I'll tell you, if you get Sterling Allen excited, he gets me excited.
It's bugger.
Come on, do the ad-lib.
I don't want to interrupt the energy here. Robert is such a master of these things, so I feel wholly confident in his ability to crack this code. Gerald, we're working on it. Maybe you could read Shakespeare in the meantime. That's always the best thing to do, is just call again. It's like rebooting a computer, It doesn't make sense, but it works. Hello?
Hello?
Ah, music to my ears.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go
Okay.
on. You were hitting a pitch.
What?
No, please go on. We're seated at the edges of our seats.
I can't hear a word you're saying. All right.
Oh, my. Robert.
As I was saying,
Yes.
I wrote this book, Trends 2000, back in 95, 96. And I pointed out, I said alternative energy had been a buzzword since OPEC oil embargo of 1973. But a variety.
And I wanted to have him on my radio show.
Right. You got me?
Yes, yes.
All right. As I was saying, I wrote this in 73, that the big issue, everybody was talking about alternative energy. And I said in 1981, only $155 million a year went into solar research and development. A single B-1 bomber cost $250 million. So, you know, that's what it's really about. The brain power.
Who has the sprinkled donuts?
Try just audio. Why don't you drop the video and we'll see what happens then.
He's saying something funny. You see him laughing? Something funny is going on here. In a few different ways, right? We could do that.
It's a good idea. Jeroen, do you have his phone number? And we'll just call him on the cell phone and put the phone next to the microphone.
Perhaps we need a Leia up there
Oh, Mead Rose, yes.
Side. Mead Rose, is he here? Mead Rose, I think try the other tent.
Yeah, that's what I think it is.
Sterling, if you could grab that phone number, that would be great. While he's still waiting patiently.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Can you text him and let him know we're going to
Call him by phone.
Can you grab
It's coming, Mitch.
Shred it after.
Thank you. He's a phone number. Hello, Gerald. This is Mitchell Rabin. I'm so sorry that we've had this technical glitch, but we found a solution because that's what we're about here at this conference. I'm going to put you on speaker from my cell phone right up to the mic. Okay? Excellent. Thanks so much for your patience. Okay, Gerald.
All right, I don't know where I left off, but hello?
Hello? Yes, we hear you.
Okay now?
I think we're okay. I might have to repeat everything he's saying.
Speakers on the back of his phone.
The biggest obstacle, as I see it, is the will and the funding. And I believe that we have the brain power to do it, but not the will to create an alternative energy that could be almost free and mostly clean. And when you think that we're in the 21st century and we're still burning fossil fuels, it's quite a fossil idea. And as I've mentioned over and over again, is that this could be the biggest both economic and geopolitical game changer. All of a sudden, there are no geopolitical interests that are tied to oil. And as we just saw just a few weeks ago, with the desire for the United States to go into, do some collateral damage, let us say, into Syria, and Libya last year, most of this has to do with oil issues and Middle East control. So the will, I believe, for a real clean alternative energy is being held up by the major powers and the powers to be. I mean, when you think, for example, that $80 billion of our money, we the taxpayer, according to the Financial Times, hardly a left-wing newspaper, is going to National Security Agency to spy on us? Can you imagine what $80 billion would do in the development of an alternative energy? Something that, on the magnitude of the discovery of fire and the invention of the wheel, it would change life as we know it, and do so in a very positive way. I mean, look what's going on in China with the pollution issues. Every year you read about it. And, there's also they're having a climate change conference in China now. And the amount of people there that are aware of it, it's astronomical when you look at polling numbers. Most everyone is. So we're ready for the new alternative energy, but again, the will isn't there. When you think that the United States, and of course with the help of other scientists from other nations, was able to put together a Manhattan Project during the brief periods of World War II and come up with an atom bomb, and now we can't come up with a clean alternative energy? It's a joke, as I see it. As again, it's the will isn't there, but the need is. And if it did come, it would, again, as I said, it would solve a lot of the geopolitical and economic problems that are facing us all. And when you look at what it costs people to drive, and automobiles, and how inefficient the whole systems of transportation are, so much of that would change with rail and other means of transportation that could be clean and essentially energy reproducing rather than gas guzzling.
Well, you know that we're not going to be giving up, even if the powers that be or will be aren't in favor of our interests in developing free energy technologies. What do you see as how we can enter the marketplace even without something like government funding or even big corporate funding?
I was at yesterday. I'm getting some feedback. Yesterday was the bicentennial of the birth of Giuseppe Verdi. And I was at a concert up here. I'm in Kingston, New York, up in Phoenicia, just north of us, and they have this wonderful Festival of Voices. And it's outdoors, and it was at the level of Metropolitan Opera. And I thought to myself, first of all, Verdi, most of the music that he composed, he did it with the desire for the Italian people to instill in their spirit to rise up against the occupiers. In those days, it was, of course, the Austrians and the Hungarians, the Germans were there, France had a peace, Spain, the Neapolitans couldn't speak the same language as the Calabrians. So it was to unify the nation, and he did it with music. And as I was sitting there, and I thought to myself how desperately the world needs de Medicis, patrons of the arts. And to answer your question, how desperately the world needs patrons of alternative energy. I'm sick of these billionaires that want to keep making more and more billions, and they give very little or next to nothing back. These are the numbers, and I'm not making them up. 400 people in the United States have a net worth of $2 trillion. What are they going to take this dough with them? Hey, you know, they found the bones of King Richard III under a parking lot last year. Yeah, so what are they holding on to it for? You're only dust. So the money is there. You know, and what's the fellow that's, the Hyperloop, is it called? Or the guy from PayPal that's trying to do positive things. It's that kind of money. But you have a bunch of people in this time of life where quality doesn't count. And I do corporate work, you know, at a minimum, but I'm around them all the time. And you know what their mantra is now? Quantity and efficiency. The word quality isn't even entering into their brain. So it's all there. If just a few of the people with money recognize what they can do to improve society on a global level by investing in alternative energy, then we would have it. Just like we had a renaissance because the people with the money, the Medicis and others, put it to a use that brought the people to a higher level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your good thoughts and inspiring words and humor. At the moment we so need it. So, Gerald Celente, thank you so much for joining us here at the conference. Next time we would hope that you could join us in person, that we don't have to bother with Skype.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Is this microphone
Yes.
working fine? Okay. Folks, I'm going to just give the second half of the bitter pill that I began administering yesterday. It's the only real function I serve. We are here but a gathering of souls, and perhaps a gathering which is being mirrored in another quadrant of the universe at this time. Meaning to say, we are all of us here in phase conjugate dielectric, is that what it is? Dan moves us in heart resonance, in fellowship. And I think that is let me start by saying this, because these are the points I wanted to draw on. In the United States, an 8th grade student is facing a year in prison for wearing a t-shirt with the National Rifle Association logo. In the USA this year, a 9-year-old school child was tasered twice before being handcuffed for skipping school. On May the 4th, in the US this year, another 10-year-old boy was tasered at school, 2 barbs penetrating his chest by a policeman who wished to make a point to the boy about what happens to folks who don't obey orders. World governments spend $1,735 billion on war in 2012. 44% of that was underwritten by the United States. It would take about $135 billion, which is less than a tenth of the 2012 war chest, to eradicate poverty across the globe. The US ranks first in the world in global crime, rape, CO2 emissions, divorce rate, teen birth rate, heart attacks, plastic surgery, prisons, and prisoners. The US issued the most vaccines and yet has the worst under 5 mortality rate and high infant mortality rate on the planet. I'm nearly through. 25 members of the team who allegedly killed Osama bin Laden are dead, including the SEAL Team 4 commanding officer. 22 service veterans commit suicide each day in the United States, over 8,000 per year and rising. In 2011, only 17 US citizens were killed worldwide as a result of terrorism, including deaths in all theaters of war. About 150 people a year are killed by police in the United States, while significantly more people die from firework discharges, lightning strikes, hornet stings, and antipsychotic drugs than through the acts of terrorism. We produce food sufficient to feed over 12 billion people in this world with a population of under 7. That ends the bullet points which are just meant to sober us into the appropriate conversation. Now, we need to ask ourselves, is this a dream of our making? Is this the world that we choose? Write the answer on a piece of paper by all means and put it in your pocket, because the answer is only relevant to the individual. The odd weather notwithstanding, it seems that the golden thread which binds all of our distinguished speakers today and their fantastic presentations, Catherine, I finally made your talk today and I'm delighted, thank you, is about the need for that thing I spoke earlier about fellowship, the phase conjugate dialectic, to stand and have it. If we take nothing else from this conference, let each of us simply acknowledge one great resounding aspect of an eternal truth, and that is that we are electing to dream this dream. We are not subjects. We are the eternal witness. We are not victims. Would you like to introduce our guest?
Thank you, Sacha. I want to first thank Sacha Stone for sharing this.
And bitter pill, as he so well put it, and it really does need to undergird our entire thrust of our good work with developing these technologies. So thank you, my dear friend. Yeah. Why don't you begin with Catherine, and
Indeed.
we would like to hear.
Would you mind, Catherine, just give us 3 minutes and summarize the gist of your talk today for those who weren't here? I know that's a hard ask.
Can I just tell a story?
Impossible request.
Okay.
But we focus on the impossible here, so you're elected.
Okay. How many people here have heard the red button story? Okay, so you're gonna forgive me, I'm gonna tell it again, and this gets to Sacha's question of responsibility. In the summer of 2000, I spoke to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation, and they had asked me to give a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime, which later became an article called Narco Dollars for Beginners. It's up on the web, you can find it. And I was in the middle of a speech, never have an epiphany in the middle of the speech, but I did. I was in the middle of the speech and I was talking about the fact that a Department of Justice spokesperson 2 years before had told a reporter that I was working with that the U.S. economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all illegal money. So that's narcotics trafficking, that's financial fraud. In fact, the number's now much bigger. But $500 billion to $1 trillion a year, that makes us the global leader. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in money laundering? So we had a little interactive conversation. They said, you know, we would offend the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money and the accumulated capital thereon. After many decades, you can imagine how much money that is. So I said, okay, well, let's just pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern, and if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your community tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion in the accumulated capital hereon. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? 1. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our government checks to stop, we don't want our taxes to go up, and we don't want the value of our retirement accounts to go down, because that money would go to Singapore and Hong Kong instead of to the New York Stock Exchange. Now, here's what I learned that day. I learned 2 things. First of all, let's just pretend for a second that we nominated and elected all of you to be President of the United States. You'd walk into the Oval Office and you'd turn to your sort of political guy and say, what do I do now? And he'd say, well, the American people just spent $1 billion to get you elected, and what they all want is their check. They want their Social Security check. They want their low-income housing tax credit. They want their agricultural subsidy. And so they want their check. So you turn to your Secretary of the Treasury and say, how do I get the money? And you say, you got to be nice to the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money. Now, in Washington, everybody knows you can't make a big change in policy without at least 80% of the American people supporting you. Now, if only 1 out of 100 of the most spiritually evolved people in the country will push the red button, and you're the president, how are you going to push the red button? And that's why we see the kind of budget problems we have now. Here's the secret. The other thing I learned that day. Everyone was so afraid of having the conversation that they couldn't ask the right question, which is not how do we push the red button. The question is how do we turn the red button green? How do we make money pushing the red button? Because in fact there is a way. And part of the secret is what we talked about in the speech I gave today, which is if you look at how government money is invested by place, if you could change that at the same time you could bring in the kinds of technologies we're talking about here, there's more than enough wealth to, as Sacha was saying, end poverty, to push the red button. It's not a problem, but we need to have an honest conversation about what's really going on, and we need to take responsibility. So yes, as you listen to that list, we're describing many things the leadership is doing wrong, but if you go community by community throughout America, we're all doing it too. And that's powerful to understand that, because that means we can change. If we can change, we can turn the red button green, and that means we can push the red button.
Thank you, Catherine. That was 6 minutes. That was 6 minutes. Let me back up.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Would you pass that microphone just forward to Tom Malone, who's next, and then we'll just go a few minutes per person to do an impossible summation of what you were sharing with the people today.
Okay, here comes 90 slides into 3 minutes. I'm kind of joining this conspiracy storytelling, so I might as well tell a few that I left out of my presentation earlier. But I want to emphasize the fact that one of my slides showed Prometheus, and it's very important perhaps for some of you to understand the Promethean dilemma that we're in right now. If you examine the archetype of Prometheus, basically it's someone who stole fire from the gods. And when you think about it, the idea of using fire to burn morbid archetypal remains of our ancestors, of organisms that lived on the earth, is basically trying to bring death to life with fire, and then it's got to produce more death. That's the archetypal symbol. And the myth tells us that it's going to take a Herculean effort to free Prometheus, which is basically the humankind that's committing this crime. So if fire belongs to the gods, it should stay there, and we shouldn't be using fire. So that's my message of today. But I wanted to remind you also, since we're talking about other negative stories, there are a couple of interesting stories that I've witnessed firsthand, and I find myself telling them to cameras consistently when I'm interviewed. One is the story that I experienced with Martin Fleischmann. Martin, as you know, Pons and Fleischmann were the discoverers of cold fusion in 1989. Well, a few years later, I was fortunate enough to be involved with a Naval Research Lab scientist who said, hey, Martin Fleischmann's coming to town to lecture at the lab. How about if you organize a little mini conference so we can all come over to your hotel and wherever you pick, which I picked a local nearby place, and then we can have a little seminar with Martin. He'll have fun. We'll have dinner. It'll be a good time. So we did it. We actually funded the whole thing, and Martin gave a nice little lecture. It's on video, which actually the coldfusion.org is going to actually use apparently in her movie. Ruby Carrot is the person I'm talking about. So the important part of my story here is that Martin decided after he's done with dinner to share with us what he called a spook story. And this is probably characteristic of what's going on even today, which has happened here at the University of Colorado as well. Martin said to us, he says, after the press conference of the University of Utah in '89, he says, I was supposed to catch my plane back to Britain, and it was a connection in San Francisco, and he says, I missed my connection. I had to check into a hotel. And as I'm turning the key to the hotel door, the phone rings in the hotel room. And stupidly, he goes and answers the phone. He says, and I went over and answered the phone, and on the other line was, this is Edward Teller. Don't hang up. I have questions for you. Now, I have to interrupt my story to see if your audience is aware of who Edward Teller is. Edward Teller, Dr. Edward Teller, is the only person, the father of the H-bomb. History tells us, Scientific American had a beautiful article saying, the H-bomb would never have been invented unless Edward Teller had single-handedly bulldozed the American military into saying, we got to make it bigger and better. And you have to use an atomic bomb to fire the H-bomb. The hydrogen bomb is, about 100 times more powerful. Anyways, the point is, Edward Teller controls, a good portion of the Black Project military budgets as a result of his heroic journey into the H-bomb world. So and he's asking Martin Fleischmann, can you make a bomb out of cold fusion? That was his question. And Martin's a pacifist, and he said, he reflected on his answer years later, but his answer was no. And he discouraged Edward Teller from even pursuing that route. Well, as time would tell, it basically was something that he regretted in a way, because cold fusion ended up being an explosive problem. Twice it actually caused explosions in labs through high-pressure cold fusion. And years later, actually when we saw him, he says, as I look back, cold fusion probably would have had a lot less ridicule if it had been classified and gotten all the funding it needed and gone the fast track to development, even though the public wouldn't benefit from it, So this is the military dilemma that constantly haunts us whenever people like Martin Fleischmann, do the good deed of trying to let the public know, perhaps prematurely. And I experienced a similar thing from Dr. Frank Mead, who was the director of the Air Force Research Lab for years. And I knew him personally, got to meet him in the Joint Propulsion Conference in Salt Lake City, and as soon as I shook his hand, he started dumping emotionally on me about the problems of his job. And the first thing he said is, I've constantly tried to come up with aviation innovations for the Air Force, and I roll it into my bosses, and they give me a cut in pay. He says, it's happened to me twice. He says, I was even supposed to get a $10 million grant from a congressman. And then I got a call from the Pentagon. I had to fly to the Pentagon, and the generals told me they were threatening me with a court-martial. He says, I can't be court-martialed. I'm a civilian PhD, a scientist. He said, all I could understand is that they're angry, and I can't accept the money. So he was like totally discouraged, and he says his conclusion was, I'm just a storefront. Those are his exact words. He said, I'm just here to testify that research is being done, but I'm not supposed to innovate. The classified world is a very demarcated line, and as soon as civilians cross it, basically you get a slap on the hand. And they're into a 50-year history of what they call the $1 billion secret. There was a 2-hour documentary by Nick Cook, a personal friend of mine, who's an excellent journalist. So this is what would you say, the bull in the china shop that we really have to be aware of in some way or another.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. What we see at the end of the day is that emotional healing is needed everywhere. Right? We'll get some more of that tomorrow in some of our presentations. Steve Ross, hi there.
Hi there.
If you would, talking about such matters, dealing with the subject of Royal Remington Rife is another really fine example of this kind of carrying on.
Yes.
A really high quality
It is.
technology that's being suppressed.
Well, the intent of my presentation actually was to capture your interest and consciousness by supplying examples of two scientists who transcended boundaries. That really wasn't the intent, because the intent that I desired to share with the audience was our potential. And the last 10 minutes was really the focal point of why I wanted to come and share. The aspect that individuals can transcend boundaries that they believe. I want to share a quick story. I didn't have time to. When I was a young guy, I lived in the Los Angeles area, and LA to Las Vegas was about a 3-hour trip. I was 21, driving in the car, and the only thing on the radio was country western music and Paul Harvey, the great commentator. So I chose Paul Harvey. He shared a story that every year at Harvard Medical School, a professor shares this story. He was in the heart division. He had 10 interns with him. They went to the bed of a man who was in a coma and was ready to die at any moment, and they were going to take over the bed. So this professor takes a stethoscope, puts it on the heart of this particular patient who was in a coma, and he says to the interns, I want you to listen to the beat. Now just listen to the wholeness of that beat. Well, the man was about to die, but each of the interns put their stethoscope one after another on the man's heart, and they said, oh, we can hear. They could hear the erratic beat, the broken heart. Well, the man didn't die that day. In fact, he comes out of the coma the next day. 2 days later, he's walking around. And then 2 weeks later, he's checking out of the hospital. When the Harvard professor comes up to him and says, wow, you're an absolute miracle. The man says, what are you talking about? He says, we expected you to die. We're going to take over the bed. And the man says, well, that's not what you told me. And the doctor says, well, what did I say to you? He says, when you told me how whole my heart was and 10 other doctors agreed, I thought it was okay. Now, he was in a coma. His heart was completely broken up. But not only did he think he was okay, he was 100% okay, and that heart was rectified. So, what are we capable of? So my presentation at this more technical group was to grab your curiosity with these incredible pictures of the bonds with atoms. But my real intent was to share what we are all capable of. And I ended my presentation by saying, everything is possible when you have a beautiful heart, an open mind, and a humble spirit.
What are you? What is each one of us doing on this planet? Are we here to pay bills? Are we here to follow a completely corrupt way of life? I am not here for that. I am not interested in a new monetary system. I am not interested in a new way of using oil. I am interested in giving a voice to those of us who were given a gift, the gift of insight into the multidimensional nature of reality. For me, the no child left behind idea means that every child is left behind. I honor with compassion and respect those who wish to continue the day-to-day grind of oil and money. And I allow in my consciousness space for those individuals who wish to hold on to their belief systems of religion, politics, and every other aspect that makes up this reality. My personal truth, as consciousness or unconscious as you wish to see it, is to seed a new reality by showing a living example of our galactic consciousness, of the connection that we have to the universe. I allow individuals to have a country that still will grind away for another 1,000 or 10,000 years. I'm inviting individuals who are already there to show the rest of the world what is possible. Not the understanding that I have the right way or the not. No, this is my truth. My talk is about healing, galactic consciousness, as being the direction of what we call breakthrough or free energy. Our free energy or breakthrough energy devices should look like something that came from heaven, not create more technology that looks like bombs. I should be able to stand next to this technology and heal my body and connect with my source. I don't care about what we can do in the next 200 or 300 years. I know what's possible right now. So as an artivist, as a transcendental visionary, these are the gifts that are working through me. This is not me. This is just a vessel. I'm building a nation called Vosa Nation. I'm tying into other projects, like the New Earth Project, hopefully, who already have a living, breathing understanding of this. So we can guide. And I'm not interested in convincing the universities. I've already played that for 20 years. I'm not interested in inviting anybody who's going to fight and try to debunk and somehow bring the misunderstandings of their fear and lack. This is a tough decision to denounce reality, because it goes against a lot of what we say. Well, you're Mr. Consciousness, spiritual woo-woo. You should already be accepting of everybody. No, I want to jump out of the labyrinth because I have tried it already. There is another world outside of the labyrinth where we are multidimensional, we are healing each other, we're bringing in technology that doesn't fit in any paradigm. Technology that connects us to beings in Vega or the Pleiades, or understanding that Gaia is a living, breathing entity that's part of a larger body of the galaxy. This is what I'm inviting the audience to contemplate. And if it doesn't feel comfortable, if we still want to play with physics, we still want to play with mathematics and a limited view, and say, well, let's inch it a little bit, I say you are in your freedom to do that. My approach, my truth, is to just go beyond. So ask yourself again, what are we? What are you? Know thyself, and that's the truth that'll set us free. Which means when you connect to the frequency and vibration that we are so much more, you will see right through television. You'll see right through the money and oil and so forth. It will be almost like looking at a tin can with a string. I invite everyone to connect with that.
No, we'll start with you, David. David Martin.
My presentation was really focused on trying to understand the essential nature of the difference between the linguistics that were born of the 1691 misquote of scripture that John Locke introduced into both politics and economy, when in the opening of his testimony before Parliament, he actually misquoted, but actually his quote in 1691 was, "Money solves everything." And unfortunately, that dogma has permeated every single attribute of human endeavors at a policy level, at a structural level, and a religious level ever since. And the point that I was trying to convey in my presentation was that until we are willing to emancipate ourselves from a dependency, which is a dependency through which we become enslaved, we will have no capacity to access the multidimensionality that is actually available to us in every attribute of the cosmos. And it's ironic that despite all of the enormous amounts of effort and energy, audiences in places like this gathering, audiences in places around the world, actually, while willing to challenge assumptions that are consensus assumptions around energy, electricity, power, money, etc., are unwilling to actually hold the same degree of critique of assumptions of the monetary system. And what I tried to do is actually suggest that maybe what we need to do is actually understand that when we surrogate ourselves, our consciousness, our endeavors, and put those efforts at the mercy of that which is funded and that which is not funded, we've actually defiled the purity of the impulse that's trying to emerge. Because it turns out that the universe is one of abundant generosity. It is not one of scarcity. It's not one of proprietary enclosure. And the tools that we're using to try to emancipate energy for all humanity, if we choose to use those things which have been the manacles of society since 1691, we neither are deserving of, nor will we succeed in transforming or breaking through not only our energy, but actually the energy that's required to really reintegrate a healing strategy for the earth. I wanted to just take one moment and say that I was deeply touched by the people who were in this tent when I gave my presentation. For those of you who don't have the opportunity to do so, there is a moment in time when you realize that you're communicating to a few people who are actually resonating in an audience. And I want to deeply pay homage to the fact, and several of you know who you are, I've spoken to several of you. It was just a deep honor to be standing on this stage 10 days after being in a hospital bed, and I'm not really supposed to be standing a lot, but on a bum leg standing in front of you, I want you to know that I received so much energy and so much love and so much compassion and so much relief and so much life from you, that in that moment I was deeply touched. And I am deeply grateful to each one of you who actually held that space. Thank you very much.
I'm Mark Brash, aka Zero Fossil Fuel on YouTube, and I represent the portion of the breakthrough energy movement where I consider myself to be a member of boots on the ground in terms of motivating and energizing other people to get out and try and build something, to educate them, and to attempt to build it myself, because we're all working toward the same goal, to divorce ourselves from, as David said, the manacles that we have traditionally held to. And we believe that a true breakthrough energy, in order for a true breakthrough energy to reach critical mass in society, it must be released in a very big way, very suddenly, very reproducible, and everything that I publish on YouTube is published open source, freely to all mankind for no charge, as well as the work that Russ does here. We are very much brethren in that regard, and we are working very hard to produce a alternative solution that would allow us to divorce ourselves from the economic constraints that we are currently shackled to. And if we can just put together pieces of it as a group, we can move the entire developmental process forward so much faster when we work together as a group and in like mind together. I have been approached by many of you here at the conference who want to share your ideas with me. I've shared everything that I can with you. I do that through the YouTube videos, through live broadcasts, and by answering as many emails as I can when people do write to me with questions. I've looked into infinite number of alternative energy technologies. Some of them are viable, some not, but I'm, like Mark Dancy, testing what is viable, testing what is not, hopefully helping to create a solution that will allow us to be truly free from the bonds that shackle us to our society.
Hi, I'm Michael Riversong. It's good to see all of you again. The talk today has a lot of symbolic meaning in my own life, but every once in a while I start wondering if maybe I'm in some kind of bizarre race against whether I'm going to get enough patronage support for the arts and the energy work, or if there's going to be some complete physical collapse coming up. It's very interesting, and I don't know why I like that drama so much, but there it is. And, but one of the things that I noticed during the talk was that the idea of consciousness keeps coming up, and that's the real key. It's not about, well, take whatever job you can get, or call the Brazilian embassy and see if they'll take you in, or whatever. It's none of that. What it is that each of us has this potential to be more conscious than you can possibly imagine at the moment, and to get up to the highest level that any human can get up to. It really can happen, and it can happen to any of us at any time, and that's why we're here on this planet. And this work with the energy, well, that's one way to express this rise in consciousness. There is a general rise in consciousness going on throughout the world. It's one of the reasons why it's possible for this gathering to be happening right now. There are different ways to look at consciousness. I tend to use some scientifically developed scale methods. The first scale of consciousness, though, if you really want to get down into this subject, was written up by Dante. The 3 volumes, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. And that's been around for quite a while, and you can find anybody somewhere in that work, anybody's consciousness, and you can find people rising and falling all the time. And so I'm hoping that this work, over everything else, results in people coming to a greater consciousness, because if we do that, you can almost say that there's a symbolism between the types of power generation technology we use, because after all, burning wood, everybody gets sick around the smoke. Burning gasoline, well, a lot of people get sick. Running nukes, not only do people get sick, but they have to get involved in tremendous tangles of lies and deceit. But the methods that we have here, one of the odd things we keep noticing over and over again is many of the technologies we develop have medical effects before we observe energy effects. And when we know we are on track when people experience positive medical results and the resulting rise in consciousness, which always happens when somebody goes through healing. And some of these new methods have huge potential and actuality, as we're seeing it now, in creating this rise in consciousness. So we keep going for it. And so this is what I'm saying is a coda to the talk. But there's one other thing I want to mention too. Music turns out to be the fastest way to change any environment. I love all of you very deeply, and thank you so much for having me here. And I hope we get to meet again many times and keep working together, because that's part of rising consciousness too, is feeling like you're working shoulder to shoulder with fantastic people in a community.
My name is Russ Grease, for those of you who don't know me. Basically, I'm a younger zero fossil fuel down here. And it's interesting that I ran across some of his videos, and I somehow just see a younger, I'm a younger him. It's pretty interesting, actually. My talk today was basically the only reason you're here, and that's because somebody told you. My speech was about open source and sharing of information. Basically, you're here because somebody told you, and that's sharing of information. And what it comes down to is that's an open source idea in my mind. So everything that I do is open source in the manner of sharing information freely, because if we do not share information, we will not learn. And everybody has got to do everything they can with individuals as a group, and that's why we're all here right now. So short and sweet. My basic principle is share, help people, and you'll receive the same thing. And it's pretty amazing. If you've never had the experience just to openly, freely help somebody, and not do it because you want something, but do it because you're interested in helping that person, you'll get a greater gift back from somebody, or something will happen to you that's just astounding. So just keep that principle in mind. But open source, baby, that's why we're here, sharing of information. Thank you.
Just got to say that for my part, listening to everybody and being aware of the contributions all of our panelists are making to all of our lives, all of us here on the panel and all of you, it's just breathtaking, isn't it? I just would love to just offer a big applause to everybody.
I want to make a quick comment on that. This whole structure of the tables and everything else in front of you, please go beyond that. We are sitting right with you, and we're here to honor this entire audience, plus the listening and watching audience across the internet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are one. And now, I hope everyone doesn't need to use the bathroom, but we're going to take a brief break, because when we come back, if you could please be back in about 5 to 7 minutes. Those who are in the other tent will be joining us, and so will Richard Nolan be joining us on the panel. So that's it.
And that's when we're going to engage. We'll engage the Q&A.
Exactly.
At that time.
I co-authored a book a few years ago called AD After Disclosure, which is really my attempt to sort of see that. What if UFOs are real? What if there's a cover-up? How then would our world be transformed, rocked by the end of that secrecy? And my own conclusion is that it would be transformed in every possible way. So all of these things I think are happening in the next 20 years. And I think they'll very likely happen kind of together. I think one breakthrough will probably lead to breakthroughs in some of these other areas. And we're looking at a very, very wild ride. One that will be exciting, one that will be also maybe very frustrating, and also dangerous. Because one thing we have to be careful of is, first of all, we don't want to believe that utopia is right around the corner. I think that's a danger. There's certainly the danger of a reaction by those elites. I call them sometimes a breakaway civilization. We can call them the financial elites. Those people at the top of our power structure who will not take this lying down. So there's going to be a struggle. Will they try to implement an in-your-face global fascist state, or will they fail? These are things that I think about, and I'm sure we all think about.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. We have an important announcement Sacha will share with us.
Before we get to that and building up to it, it's congruent with your perfect storm. As the late demigod Terence McKenna warned in his last interview, in the few short years ahead as we converge toward the eschaton, that transcendental object at the end of time, things are going to get weirder and weirder until they become so weird that we will no longer be able to ignore the weirdness. I think it's safe to say the weirdness is upon us. We've just heard varying reports in the last hour or so about the Fukushima reactor having given. Dave Martin's kindly agreed to shoulder the burden of talking on this subject for a few minutes. But before we do that, Dave, I have to say, and to also inject a little humor into the proceedings, it has not escaped my notice, sir. The last time you and I presented together, it was in 2010, last year's BEM notwithstanding. And if you'll remember, we launched the EASY initiative under multilateral observance. We were trying to create some kind of a bubble of protection for scientists and inventors to give them some level of protection so they could claw their way out of the basement and out of the closet and begin to get those algorithms and free energy systems onto the playing field. And within, I think, minutes of us finally launching that initiative, after having had the initiative scuppered, I think it was 10 or 11 days before, with our crew being arrested in the Gulf and us being set up for a huge fall, we did manage to pull it off. And within, I can't remember, it was 15 minutes or half an hour of us launching the initiative in broad daylight at the UN Millennium Plaza, the Statue of Liberty got struck by a bolt of lightning. David was there, he and I both were hugging each other in the hotel room. And it has not escaped my notice, that you were here last night and we had a mini tornado over the BEM conference. You're definitely the commonality here. Speak about the weirdness of Fukushima, if you will.
Weather anomalies and seismic activity do not go unnoticed. And for those of you who actually are in the business of noticing, we had in the last 24 hours both anomalous wind events as well as 4 precise 5.0 earthquakes, and not 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, 5.0 earthquakes. And they happen to all co-locate next to nuclear facilities. Now, one of the things that is a statistical improbability are things like the Lake Anna, Virginia earthquake that many of you remember, which was the event in the summer of 2011 that cracked the Washington Monument and did a lot of other things. And we all think of Central Virginia as a hotbed of earthquake activity. And I thought it was interesting that on the occasion of the last 24 hours, we have 5.0 events, which actually are within range of nuclear facilities, including the one that's most pressing. 8 hours ago, a 5.0 quake hit the Honshu Island area, and actually the shock waves did in fact get to the TEPCO facility. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with exactly what TEPCO is doing besides compulsive lying, which is what they have been asked to do for those who are interested in maintaining certain status quos, the tragedy is that in the effort to remediate, and by remediate, what well-meaning people are trying to do is actually just contain the tide. And I do not, by the way, fault the individuals who are in the midst of working very tirelessly against an enormous, insurmountable set of odds. There are a lot of people in harm's way, and so I want to be really clear on the fact that what I'm saying is not directed toward the individuals who are carrying out orders. Those are individuals who are literally putting their lives and their futures on the line for a humanity that's dishonoring them. But what happened with the earthquake is that there has been confirmation that has just officially been erased by TEPCO. It got erased 7 minutes ago, but there is a doubling of the current radioactivity leakage report, which actually was present in the official records until about 53 minutes ago, when it was conveniently not available anymore. And it's not available in the United States courtesy of the federal government shutdown, which actually officially just posted on the website that had the information that due to the U.S. government's furlough program, they couldn't maintain the website. Because you know how expensive having digital media present on the web. That's a very yeah, it's very difficult to maintain a website apparently when U.S. government employees are furloughed. But it's an invitation, and I want to bring this around full circle, because this is one of those places where we could actually make a huge difference. A lot of you don't know that the events that were leading up to the bombing of Iran in 2005 were actually around a series of Iran. I said Iran, I-R-A-N, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The efforts that were being coordinated by the United States and by the UK and by Israel to actually do a preemptive strike on Isfahan and Natanz in Iran were interrupted by a woman. Most of you don't know this. A very short Armenian Christian woman who actually came to me during an address that I gave to the Expediency Council in Tehran. And when I gave the address, among other things, I was introduced to the Iran Nuclear Energy Association leadership. And interestingly enough, the Iranians have done a phenomenal job at focusing their time and effort on things like containment, remediation, and neutralization of radioactive materials. They've done that in partnership with some U.S. and French universities. Purdue University, most famously in the United States, which is actually an on-record collaborator with a number of Iranian researchers. What I find very interesting about this moment in time is that in a moment when the Occidental powers that be are suggesting that we should have some sort of intervention around Iran and the nuclear situation, we as humanity have an opportunity to invite something which is actually very unusual, and that is we could launder really great technology through Iran, because Iran does not have a prohibition of actually stepping into humanitarian affairs in Japan. And if we think differently, what we'll find is that solutions are right in front of our face. In fact, the incumbency knows it. And they talk about it, and they talk about it with such contempt that it actually escapes our observation. And one of the things I would suggest is that there's an enormous amount of open source technology that's available here, and an enormous amount of open source technology in terms of dealing with radioactive disasters. And those things, if we were actually smart, what we would do is actually kill multiple birds metaphorically with the same stone. And the bird that we would be going after is an eagle right now. But the way we would actually do that is to actually create a commons that would actually be in the trust and custody of Iran. You know, the funny thing would be is if Iran actually got the reputation of being the place to go for nuclear waste remediation and disaster remediation, it'd be really, 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 really difficult to mask that with a cover story. So my impulse, it's a hunch, but my hunch is that we're actually invited in this moment to actually do something, rather than sit here and hypothecate about how the world is falling apart and how we can't do anything about it because the powers that be are the powers that be. I'm going to tell you this story because it's an important story. After my speech, that 4'8" Armenian Christian woman who was sitting with the Expediency Council in the government offices in Tehran, and you heard what I just said, a woman, Christian, in the Islamic Republic of Iran's senior leadership, which is a mind bender if you believe any of the cover stories and propaganda. None of that theoretically even can exist if you're in the Bush administration at the time. But that woman came up to me after my speech and she opened up her purse, and in her purse was an Easter egg. And she said that since 1979 she had waited to celebrate Easter with someone from the United States. And so she came and she gave me this beautiful filigree egg. And it was painted with gold and all kinds of ornate trappings. And she gave it to me and she said, "Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me celebrate Easter with you on this Easter Sunday." And I said, "Would you mind if I took the egg and I took it up to the top of Darabon Mountain?" For those of you who've been in Iran or know about Iran, you know that Tehran is this gorgeous city sitting nestled in the valley below Darabon Mountain. And she said, "Sure." And I took it up to Darabon Mountain and I took the egg and I built a cairn and I put the Easter egg on the top of the mountain in a cairn. And the reason why I did that is because I knew that what was going to happen when I got back to the United States is I was going to be invited to the hospitality of our government. And I was. And the cool thing was I was able to give them all of the information about how horrifically terrible I had been treated and how miserable it was and how the kebabs are amazing and the pistachios are crazy and the women, my God, beautiful beyond belief. And I got to the end of the story and I had one more story and I told them the story about the woman in the Easter egg. And to his credit, Andrew Card, and I don't say much good about the Bush administration for very good reason for those of you who know me. But I will tell you that the Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, came up to me with tears in his eyes after he heard that story, and he said, if our intelligence has it impossible for a 4'8" Armenian Christian woman to be in the Expediency Council chambers of Iran, then the rest of our intelligence has to be questioned. Now, if a 4'8" Armenian Christian woman with an Easter egg can block an offensive, preemptive nuclear strike on Iran against the powers of the United States, UK, and Israel, I'm going to tell you that a room full of people like us can change a hell of a lot more than a leaky reactor. And it's time for us not to sit here like sheep. It is time for us to say, if some of us have solutions, think about the value of the conduit, of not trying to put our flag or our ego or our identity on top of something, and realize that this is time for humanity to stand up as humanity and solve humanity's problem and let the politicians do with it whatever the hell they want. Because it's not about them, it's about us, and it's always been about us. There is no catastrophe except the catastrophe of our conscience. Let's use this moment to stand up for humanity.
Good, thank you, Dave. Following that theme of Iran, Catherine, earlier you said something very poignant, which is that if everyone had equity invested in Iran, would we be trying to bomb the hell out of it? The answer is no. You also spoke of crowdfunding, and I was thinking, why don't you set up the world's biggest crowdfunding campaign and get every war protester on the planet to crowdfund and purchase the corporate state of Iran. It's a corporation. Get a lot of support.
Well, I want everybody to think small. So when you say big fund, to me that's centralized, aggregation of money. It's very, can I just mention, I had some very interesting discussions with entrepreneurs, and I want us to think very creatively about creating lots of small equity funds. So let me give you an example. I was talking earlier. If, let's say you had a technology and you were doing open source, as has been described, and you open sourced your technology to a community, and then you went to the community, and instead of charging them money for, let's say you did a workshop, you have tremendous potential to increase the efficiency of agriculture and tremendous potential to increase the value of the real estate by bringing the costs down, the electricity costs and energy costs. Think about maybe going into partnership with lots of community venture funds all around the world. Any country that invites you, any community invites you, where you go in partnership. You bring the technology, they bring the farms, they bring the real estate, they bring the land, and you go into partnership together to see if you can raise the value of things by reducing poverty and reducing the costs. So think in terms of thousands and thousands of sort of venture funds that are more like wildfire or wildflowers than big, okay? Or thinking small.
Nice, thank you. Before you hand the mic back, you mentioned in your talk, and I think you cited Richard Dolan, that we're coming into alignment after 20 years with the breakthrough civilization. Can you please summarize what that means, the breakthrough civilization, for those who weren't at your speech?
Or who weren't at Richard's, because I have to give Richard credit. Since 1947 in this country, we've had the development of literally a breakaway civilization of people who have now amassed very, very significant financial resources. I described in my talk, I described the period from 1995 through the bailouts to be literally a financial coup d'etat. My back-of-the-envelope estimate is we've moved about $40 trillion out of what I call the legacy economy and into new structures. And I suspect one of the things we're starting to see, as Richard mentioned, the 3D printing, we're starting to see technology coming out of the black budget side, and there is a tremendous interest by the leadership in seeing that technology prototyped and adapted. And it can go much faster, in fact, if it's allowed to spread on a very decentralized basis. So I think I talked also about bringing us into alignment between living systems, so the popsicle index is what I described, and the Dow Jones Index. We've been in a win-lose relationship between financial capital and sort of people, and now the opportunity is if we can bring that back in alignment. So anybody who's traveled among the leadership knows that within the bureaucracies of military, of business, there are many, many people who feel like they're the prisoner of the system, who would love to leave those systems and come join us. So I think there's a lot more possibilities for alignment, particularly if we move into an equity model. So I would really encourage you to turn to everyone you know throughout what I call the tapeworm systems and invite them and say, come on over here. We're having much more fun. And frankly, our technology is better.
Dr. Brian O'Leary was a house guest of mine shortly before he died. He spoke in reverential terms about you.
Oh, really?
Yes, he did.
Oh, that's nice.
I have a question for you. If you had the full attention of Congress for 60 seconds, full attention, mind you, what would your message be?
Well, I shared this today, actually. The Power Africa project that we have, actually, we call it the IRI Africa Homes Light Project, is something that could easily be done by governments, industry, or even crowdfunding. And this is providing 10,000 homes per month with the basic, very basic thing that we enjoy right now. And those are those little white things on the ceiling. How would you like it to be sitting here in the dark? There are millions of people in Africa that sit in the dark every night, and they're still going to school during the day, and they still try to do their homework by candlelight or by a flashlight. So this is my basic solution to the problem, and I saw some inspiring stuff at the United Nations through the Youth Summit, Nexus Youth Summit. It's held every year through the Common Cause organization in Washington, D.C., and they do an invitation-only program, and you see these one-man shows that accomplish more than governments can accomplish. So that's what I would be sharing with Congress. Why try to implement a huge program and then try to worry about the deficit and all that, you know, paying off the deficit, when you can do these things for pennies compared to the trillions of dollars that the World Bank estimates to electrify Africa.
Great stuff. Thank you. Second question.
God bless Brian O'Leary, too.
If you had to flee the solar system, and if you had an unlimited budget, what would your crafted choice be?
I'd probably choose the Lazar Sport model, perhaps, or a slightly bigger one that handles more than 3-foot occupants.
And would you have Dan Winter as your navigator?
No, I think I'd choose the more practical engineer. No offense, Dan.
Wonderful, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Rabin. I want to just make a quick comment before we open the mics to all of you, and that's in reference to some of the points were made by David Martin relative to Iran and Tom about Power Africa. I want you to all know that there are initiatives of which I am aware and also connected to that are involved in bringing electrification to millions of people all throughout Africa, and the Power Africa initiative. It is beginning to happen now, as well as bioremediated water, because women who are walking many miles with a bucket on their head of water, the water is oftentimes contaminated. So at the same time, we're bringing electrification to millions of people. It's a process taking place beginning literally in about 2 months.
Do you mind if I interrupt a second? Are you familiar with how they're bringing electrification to Africa presently? Yes. Through the industrial approach? It's the same.
This is you could say, an end run around the big hydro.
Centralized power. It's the same infrastructure we have here.
That's not what I'm talking about.
That's what they're going to copy in Africa if they get their way.
The reason I'm telling you this is because it's not that. It's not that. It's a much smaller, almost micro level way of bringing micro hydropower technology into rivers and streams that are only 4 feet deep. That's how local the project is. And it's beginning to catch on, and it's bringing electrification so we can help these people have lights and schools and wells that have electric pumps, and literally to transform their lives, as well as remediated water. So I just want to say that. Another point regarding what David said, I'm also aware of people who are doing the same thing because of the window that has opened in Japan, because there are many members of the Japanese government who are scrambling to get away from nuclear power, and the door is wide open for all sorts of interesting new technologies to come into that marketplace. And I know of people who are working actively in unison with the Japanese government to accomplish that.
I just have to say,
it's really something excellent that's going on.
It's a very dangerous thing for us to bring up the subject of utilities at the same table as David Martin. Did you want to? You kept coughing. Do you want to say something to that? Okay. Well, as a
got another storm coming, brother.
Fine. As a third generation white African, I'm somewhat qualified to speak a little on behalf of Africa, somewhat. And these noble initiatives notwithstanding. It seems to me, as an African, that the best thing we could do for Africa is to get the hell out of its face.
I beg to differ, because there are many people who are suffering and asking for assistance. So it's being done, as far as I know, in a very sensitive way according to the needs of the people. that is what's happening. And, you know, we share one heart, and we need to respond to people in need. So that's how I feel.
Also referring to the corporatocracy.
I'm not. That's my point. So on that note, we'd like to open this up to all of you for questions.
Do we have a microphone in the audience?
Yes, the young gentleman over there with the big right hand.
Wait for the mic. Wait for the mic.
Hello. 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 No mic.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, there you go.
Hello. Thank you all for this opportunity to share and for all the sharing that you are all doing. Namaste. And I love you. I am here to share a message and a question for all of you. And the message is a formula that leads to instant world peace and abundance for all, and it can happen before the year is over. That is the infinite potential that I see, and it can be understood by children, and it synthesizes the logical mind with the heart's desire to believe in infinite potentials. And in fact, all of you spoke on aspects of it quite synchronistically. It is the green button, and it does not require inventions, and it does not require the government to tell us it's okay. It can be shared in a matter of minutes, and I would be honored to have that opportunity at any time you wish, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's right now. It is entirely up to you. Thank you.
Coming up front to the front.
Yeah, speak on it. I heard it yesterday and it blew me away.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is the pinnacle of my entire life, so thank you.
Make it count.
Thank you. Wow. So, speaking about zero-point energy, speaking about Higgs boson, it is in our hearts, and we have access to all information, past, present, and future, through the vibration of unconditional love, compassion, and gratitude. In that vibration, ask, and we shall receive. As we begin to ask, our questions begin to grow in quality, and our answers, through the unified field, connected to those questions, begin to grow in quality. The heart speaks in simplicity, and so essentially this is the mind accepting that simplicity, which is the wormhole to complexity. It's the yin-yang that exist within each other. And so unified intent, the left and the right, the heart and the mind, allow for reality creation. We are creating our realities by the stories that we tell ourselves and each other in every moment, individually and collectively, consciously and unconsciously. And so unified intent is the key. Individually and collectively, unified intent is the key. So the question is, what is it that we can all agree upon, point at, and say yes? 1 billion people, $1, one time. Just to say, what are we capable of? What happens if we like what we see? Do we point again, and again, and again? I'd like to point to all of you. $1 billion, $1 billion, $1 billion. And so how is this possible? Through the process of Socratic questions, we can allow for the solutions to unfold within those who are answering the question, which are all of us. So through the process of 13 Socratic questions, we can paint a picture of the mission-dependent components for global cooperation. Irreducible complexity. And they begin with two questions, the feminine and the masculine. Question 1. How much money would each and every one of you pledge for the guaranteed unification of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion? Imagine this as humanity's co-creative response to the Giving Pledge. What's the Giving Pledge.org? Bill Gates and 50 or so billionaires have come together to honor humanity by presenting their wealth to humanitarian efforts before they die. This is humanity acknowledging that, honoring that, and presenting one venture philanthropic opportunity. So, answering that question on, for example, receivingpledge.org, each and every one of us pledge. The guarantee means that no money is transferred until after unification, meaning there's no risk. Second guarantee means that until you see a co-created vision that you fully agree with and understand could lead to world peace, you don't have to transfer the money. And so co-creatively on one side, we create the mission-dependent components, and on the other side, we bring in incentivized unification. Zero risk, everything to gain. The question is, how much would you pledge? With 1 billion people guaranteed around a world peace initiative understood by everyone. The reason why I share this is because each and every one of you now have this formula, and it is a torch that we can all carry. The co-creative vision, the mission-dependent components, irreducible complexity, thinking as big as we can.
Let's talk about buying Monsanto.
Thank you. The Earth Cooperative, 7 billion free, equally distributed shares. Open source everything. The cooperative acquisition of industry. What company do we buy that we're already supporting? Perhaps a salt company. The new product is natural salt. Anybody here buy salt?
How about we just buy the stock market and buy every single public organization on the planet? Let's start with that one. It's not.
The United States would be a good start.
It's not worth that much. It's maybe $200 billion to buy the entire stock market.
We're going to claim the microphone back to the panel. So give us the website.
Please.
Yes.
The stock market, by the way, is a piece of software.
Thank you.
Share with other people.
The earthcooperative.com, the receivingpledge.org, earthcoherence.com.
Before I hand the mic, just to go over just a few other questions, I had one quick comment regarding the water in the Africa. You may have heard about these or not, that atmospheric water generators that condense the water from the atmosphere and collect drinkable water. And if you connect that to solar panels, you could potentially have free water in locations where there aren't pipes or wells.
Right. Exactly. Thank you very much for that.
I'm sorry, I feel kind of like small potatoes after this last gentleman, but he said something about rivers that only have 4 foot of water in them. Now, for a long time I've thought of, what if we took a pontoon boat and we put a generator and a paddle wheel, much like on the old Mississippi River boats, and we hooked the paddle to a generator and run a cable to the shore, and we put a cable off to hold this in the middle of the stream, the fish still swim under it, the fishermen come sit on it and fish, and we have not hurt humanity at all on any stream that would have a velocity that could make any amount of electricity you want. Now let's put one boat, 2 boats, 2,000 boats down this stream, use the entire of it. We don't hurt humanity at all. It's as green as it gets. We can build it out of products, and as one fails, we blow a fuse on that one, a light comes on, and the electrician shows up the next day and fixes it.
I'm all for that.
That's what we're doing.
Again. Yeah.
That is so close to exactly what's going on.
It's already been invented. Yeah, they've actually invented it, and it's in the Hudson River. So it's a great idea, and it's an idea whose time has come, and many people are already in way ahead of that.
Yes, in the far back.
Hi, thank you very much. Just to start out, thank you very much. I have something to offer, and then I have a question, and this is pertaining to Daniel. When there's a lot of anomalies with the effects of the ABHA coil, the Rodin coil, the PoE coil, and others, there's a monopole effect. And I found a paper by a physicist named Alexander Berinsky, who had a paper by the name of Instability of Black Holes with respect to electromagnetic excitations. And it seems to me that this might help provide some insight as to why there would be a monopole with respect to individual points, the entanglement of 2 points in particular, anywhere on the surface of an event horizon relating to the underpinning nested vortices in BBM. Also, I have a question. If in your experimentation, have you taken each tile and made an individual coil of each tile and then excited them individually to see if you could get a more efficient excitation or effect from the array of coils that you guys have built?
Who's that question directed to?
Mr. Daniel.
Thank you for that question. I'm not too certain what you mean by tiled coils.
You know the little segments that, they do when they're doing the BBM math? Each one of those. That was a lot of work, though.
Do you mean to actually create the torus out of little individual toruses like a fractal environment?
Yes.
That is absolutely where we want to go with this, and that would definitely do something special, in my mind at least, and yes.
And help stabilize the propulsion system of maybe a pulsed electrokinetic craft, for instance. So I'm done. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. What a great question. We're almost out of time. I just want to make a quick announcement while everyone is gathered. In just a few minutes, when we take the last questions and close, there will be a film shown by someone who is here on smart meters. Josh, are you here? Okay, could you just say the name of the film?
The film's called Take Back Your Power. It's an expose and a whistleblower.
Could you give that gentleman a
Thank you. First of all, I'm privileged and honored to be here in the presence of so many experts who know way more than I do. And I just am so grateful to the guys at GlobalBEM for offering the opportunity. Over the past 2 years, we put together a film which blows the whistle on the corporate agenda to use the excuse of energy and of the environment and offering us benefits of control to actually take away the basic rights that we have in our society, one of them being not to be surveilled in our homes, and rights to be secure in our homes and so forth. So many of you know about the smart meter, smart grid issue. Our film coming up really gets into this, and it also gets into solutions. I really resonate with what you said, David. Now is the time that we get together, we decide on solutions, we take action, and we feel that this film can provide and will provide a platform in which we can do that in our communities. Thank you.
And that film will be on right here on that screen in just a few minutes, so you're all welcome to join. What is it, around 70, 80 minutes, Josh? Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. And we have just another question back there.
Yes. This is for Richard and/or Catherine. Catherine, I know in your financial discussions, you seem to believe that the control groups, that the financial elites and whatnot, can keep their game going more or less indefinitely until they're exposed or something happens. On the other hand, Richard seems to think that things are already happening enough through the critical mass of computing and whatnot to blow the cover off the control groups, or at least their control. My question for both of you is, I understand how the control group in the military and the private industry came to be created in the nexus of the Cold War, but I wonder, how do you see that group being self-reproducing now and in the future? Is it being reproduced institutionally, or is it personal? Is it social? How does it keep going at this point?
You're asking, how does the military establishment keep going? I'm
well,
I'm understanding what you're asking.
Well, I think I'm asking if we're imputing a control group at financial and political and government levels, including the military, how does that control group continue? Is it all based in the military, or do we think that there is, in fact, this elite of politicians and industrialists and whatnot that are sitting on this technology? How does that group, how does that circle perpetuate itself?
I'm sure Catherine has thoughts on this. I'll just offer. I do think that we're headed toward we're in a war right now. The war is between those few people who've got a preponderance of power and information against the many of us who have developed a new infrastructure to fight it. So that's a war that's happening. It's a war over information. It's a war over freedom and really our own sovereignty. I think that the group that's been in power, I think the military, U.S. military, is a police force. And it's a police force that doesn't work for you and me. It doesn't even work for the U.S. government. It works for international financial groups. We understand that presidents aren't elected, they're selected. They're selected. And we know that, the controllers of national security in each of the parties, whether it's Henry Kissinger or Zbigniew Brzezinski, both have worked for David Rockefeller. I mean, that's national security policy. So there's a control. It's financial. It sits behind every president, and that determines U.S. foreign policy. So that's where it's at. And within the black budget world, what we can call the world of special access programs and whatnot, we know that the dominant power of those is not U.S. DOD, but rather private contractors and private money. So it's all private money. I mean, they get their hooks. If we were controlled trillions of dollars and we were twiddling our thumbs and deciding how can we make our money work for us this year, we wouldn't do investments like, poor slobs around the world. We would control events, and we would control governments, and we would control policies. And I think the U.S. military is the best police force in the world, so that's the best force to control, and they exercise that control through the office of the president and National Security Council and all of that. I don't know if that answers your question.
At last count, about 800,000 of them have been laid off.
Well, there's a federal shutdown, but not for DARPA and not for a lot of the military and the intelligence community. They have their own sources of money. DARPA is still creating Terminators, so they haven't shut down.
Statistically, it's 83% of the government still functional, and then the ones they shut down don't have to be. They did it to hurt people, but it's backfiring because all the people are starting to revolt. You heard the national parks and stuff. People are breaking through the barriers. Veterans are getting arrested, and even the people who were not awakening are awakening.
Richard, does your narrative by any chance extend behind that Hermes veil to what I call the Babylonian priesthood, with really the sort of uber lords of the wealthy families that we're talking about? Meaning to say, good old-fashioned Canaanite ritualism.
Well, I hesitate to explore that because it's not a world that I inhabit. But I do. I don't inhabit their world. They haven't invited me to their parties. But I mean, I guess what you're asking, I suspect that there's a very, very specific agenda and a very, very closed group. This group may have existed for a long, long time.
Thank you.
Yes, I think that's quite right.
I just wanted that on the record. Thank you so much.
Catherine, would you like to respond to?
Very, very simply, I said it before, in that world, because unfortunately I was invited in, the dominant organizing principle is conspiracies. And so they're very good at conspiracies, but again, as the British poet said, we are many, they are few. We just need to get better at conspiracies than they are. Okay, so don't worry about whether or not there is a conspiracy, because there certainly is one. Just, if you're not in a conspiracy, then you need to start one. All right?
Who wants to conspire?
I think it's very important that we realize that what we're doing is actually the opposite of that. And as much as we feed into that, we feed into needing money, into the scarcity, into the governing of each other rather than governing of yourself. Please let me finish. Into the hiding, the secrets, rather than just vibrating in the truth and in the love, then we're still feeding that machine. And the reason that that machine continues is because we continue to fuel it with our belief systems and our actions. And these kinds of things have the opportunity to create that change, but they have to go completely outside the box. We're not looking for funding. We're not looking for to be allowed to do something. We're not looking for permission. We're doing what's right now, starting within ourselves, within our families, within our communities. And that's not money. That's not power. That's not different aggregates. That's all of us doing what's right, as much as we know in every moment.
I think we will agree with that.
We still need to act. We still need to act in concert. We still need to act together.
Indeed, and then there is also a homily that's worthy of stating, which is that each man, I should say each human, in their own way, in their own time.
Beautiful, absolutely. Jeroen would be our last.
I only have a short thing to say before I forget again. The only criticism that I got from the Holland conference is that I forgot to mention and to thank certain people. And I want to thank all of you, because you're making this happening together with us. Without you, there's no conference. Derek, of course, but we're going to talk about Derek tomorrow, who's really the driving force behind this conference. I want to thank Shul team, they sponsored us. Gaiam TV, they sponsored us. There are some private persons here that I'm not going to mention, but those persons know who sponsored us. We had a crowdfunding campaign, those people sponsored us. We have the live stream now going, donations are coming in, so I want to thank the streamers. And another person that I want to thank is this gentleman, because if you talk about volunteers and putting money in and your butt on the line, this gentleman owns a printing company in Holland, and he said, I want to do a GlobalBEM magazine. I'm going to fund it out of my own pocket. We will see how it goes. And I would suggest to everybody, if you want to stay informed about GlobalBEM, about technologies, about consciousness, about the implications, then subscribe to the magazine. And we also invite everybody to be involved in the magazine. If you have articles, you want to write a column, whatever, contact this gentleman. He's got a stand outside, a booth. So I think that was basically it for today.
Comes to thanking Jeroen and Robert and the GlobalBEM team is absolutely incredible for what they have done through this. Take a bow, Jeroen. Take a bow. Okay, we'll do it again.
And then I'm going to thank again all
presentation, and thank you all of the panelists for being here, and my dear friend and colleague Sacha Stone for moderating this with me. Literally in about 3 to 4 minutes, Josh's film will be shown right here, for those of you who'd like to see it, on smart meters.